I am reaching out to gather your insights regarding a deeply distressing situation that has recently unfolded in my life. To provide you with a clearer understanding of the context, allow me to share some details about my background and the circumstances leading to my current predicament. I am 34 years old, and my wife, who is 31, and I have been happily married for just over 8 years. Our relationship spans a little over a decade, during which I have found immense satisfaction and fulfillment in our partnership. We have always cherished our time together, sharing not only a strong emotional bond but also a remarkable physical chemistry. My wife is not only my partner but also my best friend, and I have always trusted her completely, just as she has placed her trust in me. However, it's important to note that the way I describe our relationship now is in the past tense, which will soon become clear as I outline the unfolding events. We intentionally chose not to start a family right away. Instead, we wanted to savor our life together and save money for a down payment on a home. We achieved that goal last year when we purchased a house, and we had plans to begin our family this year. Unfortunately, that future now feels uncertain. In terms of our professional lives, I have a stable job that provides a good income, and my wife is a dedicated elementary school teacher who excels in her role. Her students and their parents admire her, and she truly makes a positive impact on their lives. Keeping these details in mind will help contextualize the shocking turn of events I am about to reveal. Last Tuesday, I received an unexpected phone call from a woman urging me to return her call as she had vital information to share. The name was unfamiliar, and I initially suspected it might be a scam, causing me to delete the message without further thought. Typically, I block such numbers, but on this occasion, I neglected to do so. Later in the day, I received another call from the same number, which I again allowed to go to voicemail. In the voicemail, the woman identified herself as the spouse of a former colleague of my wife who had recently passed away. She stated she had important information and implored me to call her back right away. Although I did not recognize either of the names mentioned, I speculated that she was attempting to communicate news of the colleague's death to my wife. With that assumption in mind, I closed my office door for privacy and dialed her number using my personal cell phone. The woman answered swiftly, and without wasting any time, she introduced herself and moved directly to the subject matter at hand. She informed me that her husband had lost his battle with cancer after a prolonged fight lasting over a year. I expressed my condolences and noted his name, assuring her I would relay the information to my wife. However, she swiftly interrupted me, clarifying that her call was not merely to discuss his passing. What followed was a revelation that shattered my world. She conveyed that during his hospice care, nearing the end of his life, her husband confessed to having a 3-year affair with my wife, which spanned from mid-2015 to the summer of 2018. The impact of her words sent a jolt of cortisol through my veins, and my heart began to race uncontrollably. I found myself in a state of shock, rendered momentarily speechless as I struggled to process this devastating information. After gathering my thoughts, I asked if it were conceivable that her husband's confession might have been the result of medication-induced hallucinations. She assured me with certainty that her husband had been clear-headed when he made the admission, revealing that she had discovered hundreds of messages exchanged between them on his laptop. Furthermore, she had found a disturbing video documenting their last encounter, which had taken place on August 17, 2018. As she continued to speak, I couldn't shake my disbelief. I insisted that she send me any evidence she had and provided her with my personal email address. She complied by sending some of the most incriminating messages exchanged between my wife and her husband, but the video file was too large to be transmitted via email or text. I inquired if she had a USB drive available, but she did not. Instead, she took the initiative to purchase one and called me once she returned home, at which point I guided her through the process of transferring the video onto the drive. The following morning, she overnighted the thumb drive to my office, and I received it on Thursday morning. That same day, I brought my personal laptop to work, fully intending to watch the video that would unravel my understanding of my marriage. I inserted the drive and pressed play, and what I witnessed plunged me into disbelief. There was my wife, alongside an unfamiliar and awkward-looking man, engaging in behaviors I find too painful to describe. The reality of that moment is something I am still grappling with as I try to comprehend what has transpired. The situation has become profoundly unsettling, to say the least. Some of the actions depicted in the video were not only utterly repulsive but also shockingly unhygienic, sparking feelings that are difficult to articulate. In the 29-minute footage, both individuals involved were quite vocal, laughing joyfully and clearly deriving pleasure from their disturbing behavior, which made it all the more sickening to witness. I must confess that when I first began watching the video, tears streamed down my face, and a wave of nausea washed over me. However, as I continued to observe the events unfolding on the screen, my initial sorrow morphed into an intense anger and overwhelming rage. Fortunately, my wife was not present when I viewed the video, as I cannot even begin to imagine how I would have reacted had she been there with me. The emotional turmoil I experienced was profound, and it has prompted me to reconsider the very foundation of our relationship. It is currently 7:09 p.m. on a Thursday evening, and for the past hour and a half, I've been pouring my thoughts into this post. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke with my wife, telling her that I would be having dinner with clients, which is a common part of my work life. She accepted my explanation without question. As I grapple with my emotions, I find myself leaning heavily toward the idea of pursuing a divorce. The thought of staying with her after what I have seen feels impossible. I know I will never be able to forgive her for her actions, and the very idea of being near her again fills me with dread. It is crucial to note that, shockingly, the video is 4 years old, yet it has not lessened the impact of her betrayal. This is a reality I cannot overlook. This brings me to a crossroads where I could use some input from others. Should I confront her with the evidence and give her the opportunity to explain her actions, or should I bypass that entirely and proceed directly to engage an attorney to serve her with divorce papers? Until now, I haven't shared this burden with anyone because I feel an overwhelming sense of shame. This anonymous forum provides me the needed space to articulate my thoughts and seek feedback from people I don't know. Now, let me provide a brief update on my current situation. After dinner on Thursday evening, I returned home and attempted to act as if everything was normal. Luckily, I managed to maintain a physical distance from my wife, who thankfully did not try to initiate any sort of closeness. The following day, I took a day off work to consult with a divorce attorney. After extensive research online, I gathered all the evidence, including the video, to present it to the attorney. She informed me that, although my wife had clearly violated our marriage vows, this would not impact the outcome of the divorce case. When I probed deeper into this matter, the attorney explained that our state follows a no-fault divorce system. This means that either party can end the marriage at any time without having to assign blame or provide justification. I was taken aback by this concept and inquired how this was even possible. She simply stated that it is the law, a legal framework that can be traced back to Ronald Reagan, who initiated it during his tenure as California's governor in the late 1960s. I found it surprising, as I had always regarded him as one of our most admirable presidents. However, my opinion is now somewhat clouded given the implications of that legal decision. Regardless, my resolve to move forward with the divorce remains steadfast. Unfortunately, this also means I will likely face a difficult financial situation as a result of everything that has transpired. What I am currently wrestling with is whether to confront my wife directly with the evidence I possess or to simply wait until I can serve her with divorce papers. I am inclined toward the latter, yet I find it increasingly challenging to endure her presence over these past 2 evenings. The thought of facing her again tonight is daunting. As I write this on a Saturday morning, I find myself seated outside a coffee shop a short distance from my home. I informed my wife that I needed to attend to some work emails, which is a common excuse I use to get some solitude. Thankfully, she didn't press me to accompany her, but she has already sent a few texts asking when I will be returning home. I can't shake the feeling that she senses something is amiss with me. That's all for now. In my second update, it's Sunday morning, and again, I find myself sitting outside at the same coffee shop, still ensnared in this challenging emotional landscape. The weight of my decision continues to loom over me, shaping every interaction I have. The internal conflict remains unresolved as I navigate through this painful reality. The events began about a week ago when I found myself 20 minutes away from my home, sitting in a coffee shop that now feels very familiar. It was a critical moment in my life, one I had been putting off for far too long. Last Sunday was the day I reached my breaking point, and I could no longer keep my feelings bottled up. I confronted my wife about her affair, a situation that had been eating away at me for months. I struggled through the previous day, Saturday, where we visited a museum and had dinner with another couple. The outing helped distract me from the turmoil inside. We were both too exhausted by the day's activities to even consider intimacy that night. Yet, as I stood in the kitchen the following morning, watching her prepare coffee, I knew I could not delay any longer. I felt a surge of irritability mixed with anger, but the urge to confront her outweighed my hesitations. I decided to ask her directly about a certain individual, the one I suspected was her affair partner. When I mentioned the name, I noticed the surprise on her face, a moment of guilt that was almost palpable. At first, she denied knowing him, but under further questioning, she confessed that he had worked as a science teacher at the local junior high school. At that moment, I casually mentioned that I had read about his recent passing due to a serious illness, which prompted her to comment on how tragic it was, emphasizing that he was so young and lamenting the loss of a life cut short. She went on to say that she didn't know him well but was aware he had a family, specifically, a wife and a son. After she sat down and served me coffee, I noticed the way she fidgeted, anxious and visibly on edge. Her eyes kept darting to her smartphone, as if she were waiting for a message that would never come. I took a beat, letting the tension settle, before asking if she had ever worked with him directly. She looked at me with frustration, adamant in her denial. When I pressed further, asking if she was completely sure, she reacted with an almost defensive confidence, insisting there was nothing to worry about and acting as if my questions were unfounded. At that point, I felt exhausted from the indirect approach. I decided to cut through the pretense and confront her directly. I laid it all on the table, telling her I had evidence of her long-lasting affair and demanded that she come clean immediately. The look on her face shifted from indignant to confused as she feigned ignorance. I told her she knew what I meant and that it was time to stop pretending otherwise. It was then that she broke down, tears streaming down her cheeks as she asked how I had discovered the truth. I explained that the method didn't matter, but I had kept all the love messages they had exchanged as proof of her betrayal. She attempted to gaslight me, insisting those messages were just part of an innocent fantasy roleplay, claiming that nothing physical had ever occurred between them. Interrupting her, I asked her to repeat that assertion. Each time she insisted there had been no physical interaction, I became increasingly frustrated. To push her into a corner, I showed her a video I had of them together, pressing play, capturing her in the moment. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The denial vanished, and she transitioned from the defensive to a place of remorse, apologizing profusely and insisting that it had all happened 4 years ago when she had been a different person. I could no longer engage in this conversation. I stood up and walked toward the patio, needing space and air as her cries followed me. Despite her pleas and tears, expressing that she wanted to talk, I made it clear that I needed to be alone to process everything. Her loud sobs escalated as she repeatedly called out for me, saying, "Please," in a desperate attempt to reach me. I could feel the tension rising, and to avoid causing a scene that would draw the attention of our neighbors, I turned back into the house. My anger was boiling over as I headed to the bedroom, intent on packing my things. She tried to reach for me, hugging me tightly in a last-ditch effort to keep me from leaving. I warned her that if she didn't let me go, I would send the video to her parents. At that moment, her grip loosened, and she collapsed onto the bed, continuing to cry and apologize. With a heavy heart, I proceeded with my packing, knowing I had to leave. When she asked where I was going, I told her I would be staying at a hotel for the time being. I left her there in tears as I drove away, my emotions swirling. I ended up at the coffee shop nearby, where I could collect my thoughts, just a short drive from my office. From there, I made a reservation at the hotel across the street, spending the morning contemplating my next steps. Throughout this entire ordeal, my wife continued to call and text, desperately trying to reach me, but I chose to remain silent until I checked into the hotel later that afternoon. Finally, I answered her call, and for nearly 2 hours, we talked. I informed her of my decision to divorce her, giving her a stark warning to prepare for the reality that awaited us. The conversation was largely filled with her pleas and emotional outbursts, begging me to reconsider the path we were on, but in that moment, I felt resolute, aware that this chapter of my life had irrevocably changed. In an effort to shift my perspective, I sought clarification from her regarding the nature of her relationship with her affair partner. She articulated that their connection was largely defined by a particular, rather unsettling fetish that they both shared. Beyond this shared interest, she insisted that their physical encounters bore no emotional weight or significance. To bolster her assertion, she was quick to criticize the man's appearance, pointing out that anyone would agree he looked unattractive and emaciated. According to her, this visual evidence should have been enough to convince me that she would never consider leaving me for him. Their meetings were, as she claimed, purely for the purpose of satisfying this fetish, which she further asserted that she no longer felt the desire to pursue. In response to her revelation, I voiced my concerns that she might be grappling with deeper mental health issues and gently encouraged her to seek professional help. Unwisely, she seized on this suggestion, admitting that she might very well be considered insane for her actions. This admission led her to pivot the conversation, emphasizing that all of this transpired over 4 years prior and asserting that she had not entertained thoughts of being with anyone else since then. I countered her narrative by stating that the only reason she ended the affair was because her partner had relocated 5 hours away for a job in a different school district. She tried to convince me that the end of the affair had occurred much earlier. However, I pointed out that the video evidence clearly showed she recorded it the day before he and his family left town. Faced with this reality, she had no rebuttal. The encounter left me with the unsettling realization that my wife was not just unfaithful but also prone to habitual dishonesty. In light of this troubling situation, I met with my attorney earlier this week to discuss the recent developments and to express my desire to expedite the divorce process. She agreed to take the necessary steps to move things along and advised me to halt all direct communication with my wife, suggesting that I channel any future interactions through her. My attorney also stressed the importance of avoiding any confrontations with my wife without witnesses present, emphasizing the risks involved. She recounted numerous cases in which husbands had been wrongfully accused of various misdeeds in similar scenarios, which only reinforced my resolve to heed her advice. I acknowledged her guidance and committed to adopting this approach going forward. As it stands, the situation has unfolded at a rapid pace, leaving me with little time to process the end of my marriage. Currently, I do not feel overwhelmingly distressed, but I am acutely aware that the full weight of my emotions will likely hit me at some point in the future. Following my decision to permit my attorney to expedite the divorce proceedings, I shared this news with my family. Their reaction was one of shock and disappointment regarding my wife's actions, with a primary focus on my well-being. I reassured them that I was managing as well as could be expected, yet they insisted on visiting me for a few days the following week to provide support. The next day, my mother-in-law reached out, extending an apology for her daughter's behavior. During our conversation, she asked whether there was any possibility that I might reconsider my decision or take more time to contemplate before moving forward with the divorce. I explained that my mind was made up, and all I wanted now was to achieve an amicable separation so I could begin to move on. She expressed understanding of my position, and we ended our call on a positive note. The following week, my parents arrived in town on Thursday and checked into the hotel where I was staying. I took Thursday and Friday off work so I could spend quality time with them. We filled our days with sightseeing and enjoyed dining out in the evenings. Then, on Saturday morning, my mother informed me that my in-laws had reached out and expressed a desire to meet my parents for lunch. Given that our families had maintained a friendly rapport since my marriage, I saw no reason to decline. Although they were not particularly close, they had kept in touch over the years through occasional pleasantries. I agreed to the meeting and suggested that they gather at a nearby restaurant. While they were out, my mother called to let me know that my in-laws wanted to see me as well. I invited them to come over to the hotel, and we arranged to meet on the back deck by the pool. It was a pleasant reunion, and I appreciated their presence. My in-laws were not pushy at all. Instead, they expressed sincere apologies and concern for my well-being during our time together. They were respectful of my situation and did not attempt to convince me to reconcile with their daughter until we neared the end of our visit. At the end of our meeting, my mother-in-law, whom I will refer to as M, posed a poignant question. She asked if there was any possibility of forgiveness and a chance to continue with the marriage. With a heavy heart, I had to let her know that there was no room for reconciliation. M accepted my answer, understanding that she had to make a genuine effort to come to terms with the situation. I assured her that I recognized her perspective, which was undeniably difficult for her. We shared a heartfelt hug as we prepared to part ways, and after a few emotional moments, we exchanged our farewells. With that, our meeting came to a close, leaving me to wait for the scheduling of the hearing that would eventually bring closure to this chapter of my life and allow me to move forward. Fast forward to a year later, I found myself reflecting on the divorce process. Initially, I anticipated that the divorce would be a swift and straightforward affair due to our state's no-fault divorce laws. However, the reality was quite different from my expectations. I experienced an excruciating wait of nearly 9 months before the hearing finally took place. Furthermore, I had naively assumed that no-fault divorce would result in a simple 50-50 split of our assets, but that misconception proved to be misguided. Despite covering approximately 70% of our shared bills and contributing about 85% of the assets we accumulated during our marriage, I was still required to pay alimony. My attorney negotiated a significant lump sum payment of $29,000 to my ex-wife, which came from the proceeds of selling our house, instead of a 4-year alimony obligation. The entire situation felt incredibly unjust to me. My attorney explained that I could have safeguarded the assets I owned prior to marrying, but I had made the critical mistake of adding my wife as a joint owner immediately after we wed. This decision effectively resulted in a contentious 50-50 split of our assets. However, all of that is now behind me, and there is nothing I can change about the past. What matters most to me now is that I have reclaimed my freedom. Throughout the divorce process, my relationship with my ex-wife remained civil, although she persistently sought a second chance up until the very end, and even for weeks afterward. She expressed her infatuation with me and was relentless in her pursuit of rekindling our relationship. While she wasn't overly intrusive, she would send me messages every few weeks to remind me that I was often on her mind and that she would always be available if I ever changed my mind about us. The most peculiar request came just last week when she asked if I would consider having a child with her. I firmly replied with a no, reiterating that we were divorced. She then went further, asking if I would be willing to act as a biological donor so she could have a child using my genetic material. I firmly declined and suggested that if she wanted to have a child, she should either find another relationship or use an anonymous donor. Surprisingly, she insisted that she did not want to be with another man, and if I wouldn't be the father, she simply wouldn't have children. This text exchange left me deeply concerned for her well-being. I genuinely care about her, but I recognize that it's essential to cease communication with her. The next time she reaches out, I plan to deliver this message in a gentle yet firm way. As a precaution, I also intend to reach out to her parents to make them aware of her recent behavior. I hope they can intervene discreetly and offer the guidance she might need to reconsider her stance on having children. For now, that's the situation as it stands. While I may have lost a significant portion of my net worth during the divorce, I find solace in the fact that I have regained my freedom. Now, as I reflect on the past, it's time to shift focus to another exciting chapter in my life. Recently, my mother visited me while I was at school, staying in a hotel nearby as she often did during her visits. One evening, while we were having dinner, her phone was constantly buzzing with incoming messages. At one point, when she thought I wasn't paying attention, she discreetly took out her phone to text someone her hotel location and room number. This unexpected revelation shocked me and set my heart racing. After dinner, I feigned heading back to my apartment while she went to her hotel room. Instead, I found a secluded spot, away from everything, and let my emotions out, crying for what felt like an eternity. This moment ultimately became a pivotal occurrence that led to the deterioration of my family and the closeness I once shared with my mother. It's now been over a year since that pivotal night, and I am currently navigating my third year in college. I find myself at a crossroads, faced with a tough decision about whether to enter the NFL draft or to complete my fourth year of college. My college coach is strongly advocating for me to finish my degree, although I can't shake the feeling that his suggestion is more about his own interests than what's best for me. Deep down, I am aware that pursuing the NFL draft is the right move for my career, and I must weigh my options carefully as I decide my path forward. Pursuing a professional career in the NFL has always been my dream. As I work hard to take steps toward that goal and start earning a living from the sport I love, I can't help but feel the absence of my mother, who was once my biggest supporter. I genuinely miss having her by my side, particularly during my football games. When I was just 14 years old, she was a constant presence in my life. She never missed a single game or even a practice. Regardless of the weather, whether it was a bitterly cold winter day or a sweltering summer afternoon, she could always be found in the stands, cheering me on with enthusiasm that only a devoted parent could muster. Her unwavering support was a source of comfort for me as I navigated the challenges of being a young athlete. However, everything changed dramatically one day during an away game when I discovered that my mother had started a relationship with two of my teammates. It was a situation that brought an overwhelming sense of embarrassment and confusion. At that moment, I even contemplated the idea of leaving the football program altogether because the dynamic had shifted so drastically. Despite the turmoil this caused in my life, my father, who had always played a more background role in my upbringing, encouraged me to stay focused and keep pursuing my goals. His advice helped me to regain my footing after the conflict that arose. In the wake of that revelation about my mom, I made the difficult decision to not allow her to attend any of my games. This was not easy for me. It took a considerable amount of time to adjust to her absence in the stands. To truly understand how this situation unfolded, it's important to provide some background on my family life. I grew up with two older sisters in a household that included both parents. My father was a workaholic, often absorbed in his career, while my mother worked part-time as an accountant and took on the role of a stay-at-home mom. As I reached my teenage years, I began to notice subtle changes in my parents' relationship. They started to sleep in separate rooms, and the arguments between them became more frequent. My dad often chose to walk away from conflicts to shield us from their disputes. Although I shared a close bond with my mother, I always held a deep respect for my father. It wasn't always easy, though. I would frequently hear my mother venting about my father's lack of involvement in certain aspects of life, and at times it felt like she focused on problems that could have been overlooked. I admit it, I was undeniably close to my mom, and yes, I was a mama's boy. She had always been my rock, perhaps a bit too much at times, especially when it came to motivating me and helping me hone my skills. Her relentless support played an essential role in my development as an athlete, and I owe a great deal of my progress to her dedication. It was a given that she would be in the stands cheering for me, no matter what. My father, too, was present in my life but in a quieter way. He was the type who enjoyed spending time with me in the woods, away from the hustle and bustle. He provided guidance and support throughout my life but often let my mother take the lead when it came to parenting and household decisions, primarily to avoid escalating conflicts. When it was finally time for me to select a college for my football career, my mother played an instrumental role in guiding my decision. I found myself in a fortunate position, with multiple scholarship offers, and I relied heavily on her insight to help me navigate the choices before me. Her judgment proved to be correct, as the program I ultimately joined has been a great fit for me. Once I began college, which was several hours away from home, my mother would come to visit me every couple of weeks, staying in a nearby hotel. At first, I thought her visits were solely focused on watching my games or catching the away matches, but I soon realized there was more to her presence than met the eye. If it hadn't been for her ill-fated relationships with my teammates, perhaps everything would have remained unchanged. Reflecting back, I can see that my parents' marriage was deteriorating long before that incident, primarily due to my mother becoming increasingly controlling over my father's life. Her behavior negatively affected his workaholic tendencies and added strain to their relationship. I once believed that my parents had chosen not to divorce because they were waiting for me to move out, hoping that would ease the tension. Yet, even after I left for college, I expected that they would eventually separate. Surprisingly, they didn't. My mother has always been an active woman, fully aware of her own worth, often reminding my father of her capabilities. I became increasingly aware of how my friends would talk about her and the attention she garnered, especially since high school. Initially, it was embarrassing and uncomfortable, and I found myself wishing that she wouldn't come to my games. But over time, I adapted to it and accepted that it had become a part of my life, observing how coaches and players would glance in her direction during matches. As I reflected on my relationship with my mother, I often found myself questioning her actions and the way she interacted with others. People around her consistently showed her respect, and when they would approach her or try to start conversations, she would quickly dismiss them. This behavior puzzled me. I never imagined that she would even consider straying from my father. Despite whatever doubts I might have had about the dynamics of their marriage, I held her in high regard. It was a belief deeply ingrained in me, and the thought of her being unfaithful never even crossed my mind. Everything started shifting dramatically in my second year of college. My team was part of the Southeastern Conference, and that season brought heightened excitement and pressure. I won't disclose my exact position or the name of my school, as I prefer to keep those details private. I had established myself as one of the standout players on the football team, and the prospect of making it to the NFL seemed incredibly promising. The admiration I received from fans and peers was motivating, and we had the unique opportunity as college athletes to invite family members to our games, even those played away from home. For one particular game, my mom and my older sister planned to attend to cheer me on. Unfortunately, my sister had an exam and couldn't make it, and my dad, as usual, opted out of the away games due to his demanding work schedule. The tension between my parents often led to arguments, so he generally preferred to distance himself from the environment of the games. During the week we spent on the road for that game, I noticed something unusual. I hardly saw my mom. She had made the trip to support me, yet her absence felt strikingly out of place. I initially attributed this to her being busy with work commitments, and I genuinely appreciated her making the effort to be there, something I often thought my dad wouldn't have done. A week later, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when I began hearing unsettling rumors from one of my teammates. He suggested that a fellow player had been involved with my mom. At first, I brushed it off as playful banter or teasing. This was something we frequently did to one another as a way of keeping our competition mental. Many of my teammates envied my talent and the future I had ahead, so I dismissed the gossip as mere games. However, as the rumors persisted, I started hearing similar claims from two other teammates, each mentioning that they too had been romantically involved with my mom during the same time frame. Despite the growing chatter, I hesitated to confront anyone. The sheer disbelief made it hard to accept, it felt unfathomable. It's important to recognize that it wasn't odd for family members to travel to support us during games. Almost all of my teammates had loved ones who came from various states to watch us, and I was no exception. However, everything changed when I spotted my mom after one of the games. As I made my way toward her, I noticed she was engrossed in her phone, smiling as she texted someone. Just as I approached, she hastily tucked her phone away, and her body language clearly indicated she was hiding something. Later that evening at dinner, her phone buzzed repeatedly, demanding her attention. She struggled to keep her gaze away from the screen, seemingly distracted. At one point, I realized she was texting someone her hotel information, her location and room number, and it became apparent she was eager to conclude our dinner. She had previously claimed to want an early night, yet her actions painted a starkly different picture. I had my own priorities and social commitments, so the idea of shortening our dinner didn't bother me. As we left the restaurant, she hugged me tightly before dashing to her car, leaving me standing there, confused and unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. In that moment, it struck me that this wasn't the first time I had observed behavior like hers. I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, and a wave of betrayal crashed over me. It became painfully clear that her visits to my college weren't solely about supporting her son, they seemed to be intertwined with something far more complex and secretive. Confronted with the possibility of my mother being unfaithful to my father, I was overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions. Disbelief consumed me, washing over me like an icy wave, leaving me grappling with the reality of a situation I never expected to face. It was completely inconceivable to me that the woman I had admired and loved my entire life, my own mother, could betray my dad in such a profound and devastating manner. The initial shock of discovering this truth began to fade, but as it did, an overwhelming wave of anger surged within me. I was furious with her for jeopardizing our family, for betraying my dad in such a deep and personal way, and for placing me squarely in the middle of this emotional turmoil. My anger also extended to the teammates involved, whom I felt were equally responsible for breaking a trust one had been blissfully unaware was at risk. The realization that the foundation of my family life was crumbling stirred a profound sadness within me. I felt an unbearable sense of loss. The family dynamic that I had always known, one marked by stability and love, was now irrevocably shattered. It felt as though a piece of my heart had been violently torn away, leaving behind an ache that seemed impossible to endure. Amidst this chaos of emotions, confusion gnawed at me relentlessly. I found myself grappling with a multitude of questions swirling in my mind. Why would she do this? How long had this betrayal been ongoing? And how could I have been completely oblivious to it all? It was as if I were trapped in a maze of secrets, desperately trying to navigate my way through a labyrinth of hidden truths, longing to comprehend the whole situation. Alongside this confusion, guilt crept in, seeping into my consciousness. I began to wonder if I could have done something to prevent this, if I had somehow missed any signs of what was happening right under my nose. A persistent feeling of self-doubt washed over me, making it difficult to shake off the notion that I might have played a role in this heartbreaking scenario. All these emotions intertwined, creating a tumultuous storm raging inside me. I was ensnared in a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, sadness, confusion, and guilt, all while attempting to come to terms with the reality that had been so painfully shattered. This experience was not just painful, it was bewildering, leaving a lasting mark on my psyche. In a daze, I got into my car, initially pretending I was driving away to clear my head. Instead, I found myself heading to a secluded area, a place where I could process my racing thoughts without distraction. The more I ruminated on the situation, the angrier I became. I had always thought my mom was simply visiting her son, but now doubt clouded my perception of everything. I felt uncertain about whether she had come to see me or someone else entirely. With each passing moment, a new surge of anger electrified my body. This fury was not directed solely at my mom, it also extended to the other person involved, someone I suspected to be a teammate. The rumors I had heard for months began to resurface, and I felt as if everyone around me had been laughing at my expense. It was impossible to shake the feeling that she might have succumbed to the advances of not only students but also staff members. In those moments, I realized that I was not always vigilant when it came to watching my mom during games or visits. My focus had been on the game, on the ball. I often thought she could handle herself. After all, she was an adult, my parent, and she was married. If she had chosen to divorce my dad and pursue a new relationship, I knew I might have been upset, but it wouldn't have devastated me as much as this betrayal did. What hurt the most was that she was engaging in this deceit in a place where people knew me well. I had a significant presence in that area, and I needed to concentrate on my game. She was supposed to help me with that focus, but instead, it felt like she had become a distraction. Hours passed in this fog of frustration and disbelief, and I made the decision to confront her directly. I headed to her hotel room, determined to uncover the truth about who she was involved with. Upon arriving at the hotel parking lot, I scanned the area, searching for a familiar car, but it was crowded with vehicles that all looked alike. It felt like it could have been a parking lot filled with the entire football team's cars. Ignoring my surroundings, I stormed into the hotel, driven by a singular purpose. I knew her room number and headed there with determination. When I reached her door, I pounded on it with an urgency fueled by countless swirling emotions. It took a while, but eventually, she opened the door. She stood before me, hair disheveled, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion, as if I were the one who had lost my mind. Without hesitating, I pushed past her, intent on finding out who was with her. She tried to block my path, but I was relentless in my pursuit of answers. As I entered the room, I quickly realized there was no one else there, which only intensified my determination. I noticed the bathroom door was closed and locked from the inside. Fueled by a growing sense of urgency, I began to pound on it relentlessly, forcing my way in until the door finally gave way. My mom was screaming, her panic evident, but I was beyond caring at that moment. When I finally broke through, to my shock, I discovered not just one teammate, but two hidden inside the bathroom. It turned out to be one of the guys I had heard rumored to be involved with her, alongside another friend who was always seen hanging around him. The reality of the situation bore down on me, the pain of betrayal sharper than I could have ever imagined. As someone who had a reputation for dating various girls around campus, he was considered an average player in the football scene. While he occasionally pulled off impressive plays, it was clear to everyone that there was no real future for him in the sport. When he made the decision to pursue my mom instead of any other woman, it struck me as an act of jealousy over my own success and potential. The intensity of my emotions overwhelmed me, and before I could rethink my actions, I found myself in a physical confrontation with both him and my mom. They were clearly unprepared to handle the fury I unleashed, leading to one of them making a hasty exit from the scene. Fueled by rage, I continued to confront the remaining guy, striking him as anger consumed me. The situation escalated quickly, and it was clear that I was spiraling out of control. My mom, along with another individual who must have heard the ruckus, stepped in to physically restrain me. In the chaos, I couldn't precisely identify the man trying to help, but he seemed familiar or recognized me from somewhere. He urged me to leave the area in haste, cautioning that someone might have called the police, and the possibility of arrest loomed over me. My mom was visibly distraught, tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with me to abandon the confrontation. As I departed the hotel room, leaving my teammate in a severely injured state, I was unable to suppress my anger. I turned to my mom and, in a fit of rage, declared that I was cutting ties with her. The intensity of my feelings toward her was no less than what I felt for him. I took his betrayal as a deeply personal affront, believing it was less about love and more about him trying to sabotage my future and tarnish my reputation. The drive back to my apartment was filled with turmoil. My mind raced as I grappled with the emotions swirling inside me. In a moment of urgency, I called my dad to share every detail of the incident. To my surprise, he remained remarkably calm and composed throughout our conversation. He downplayed the severity of the situation, assuring me that it wasn't truly about them but about my own journey. He reminded me that I was the one with potential, the star on the rise, and that challenges would always exist, trying to derail me. What mattered most was my response to those challenges. The aftermath of the altercation weighed heavily on my mind. I learned that the police were actively searching for me, and my teammate was contemplating the possibility of pressing charges. Fortunately, he used his connections to smooth over the legal issues, preventing an uncomfortable visit to the police station. Later, my coach pulled me aside for a private conversation, expressing that he understood my reaction and would have done the same if he found himself in my position. He echoed my father's sentiments, emphasizing my status as the star player. He made it clear that others, particularly those who lacked a solid future in football, may attempt to undermine me. Sharing a bit of his own past, he recounted how his first wife had been unfaithful, which contributed to his struggles with trusting women. During our conversation, he made it seem as though my response might have been somewhat exaggerated, but he acknowledged the humiliation I had experienced. He committed to doing his best to remove those teammates from the program, and he indeed followed through on that promise a few months later. In light of everything that transpired, I felt a strong sense of duty to remain in college for another year instead of rushing into the NFL draft. As news of the incident spread, my siblings distanced themselves from my mom, and my dad initiated divorce proceedings. Since then, I haven't communicated with her, despite her attempts to reach out. My anger toward her stemmed from the fact that if she had been unfaithful during her time and used a visit to me as an excuse, especially with two of my teammates, I could possibly understand her actions better. However, the way she nearly got me expelled from the program and jeopardized my future was something I couldn't overlook. While I do miss her presence at my games and the support she once provided, I recognize that healing from this situation will take time, as will the rebuilding of our relationship. Holding grudges isn't typical for me, and I never anticipated that this one would linger for almost a year. Although I've already reached a point of forgiveness, the challenge remains in reconstructing our connection, especially since being surrounded by people who are aware of the incident serves as a constant reminder of what happened. I refuse to allow this incident to dictate my career trajectory. I have the strength to endure this and come out on the other side. Although people may continue to gossip or ridicule me, I possess the resilience to navigate through it all. It would be a sign of weakness on my part to alter my path in response to my mom's actions and the actions of two teammates who ultimately won't have a real impact in the long run. My focus is on entering the NFL draft with determination and confidence, ready to pursue the success I've worked so hard to achieve. As I reflect on this year's NFL draft, I can't help but feel a mix of emotions. It's a significant moment in my life, one that marks the transition into a new chapter. With that said, I also want to leave any worries or disappointments in the past. There's a lot that has happened on this journey, and while I'm excited about what's next, I carry a sense of gratitude towards my coach. His unwavering support and guidance throughout my development have been instrumental in shaping not only my skills on the field but also my mindset as I prepare for what lies ahead. I appreciate the lessons learned, the tough love during training, and the strategy sessions that pushed me to think critically and improve continuously. As I look forward, I truly believe there are still some important things I can learn and achievements I can reach before officially moving on to the next stage of my career. Those opportunities for growth are vital, and I'm committed to making the most of this time, ensuring that I step onto that next field with every bit of knowledge and experience I can gather.